This week, we talk about the importance of waiting for your moment. I'm Ibarionex from the Candid Frame. Today, I want to talk about the importance of waiting for your moment. I talk a lot about finding your setting, finding basically the stage upon which you're going to be creating your images. You look at a scene based on light and shadow, line and shape, color, and what you're waiting for is that final flourish, the thing that will take that starting point, that foundation that you've set, and wait for a flourish, a moment in which the image gets better than what you initially composed. So let's take a look at some images there that illustrate that point exactly. Here we have a shot by Christopher Foley. This was created with the Fujifilm X Pro 2 at 1/30th of a second, f11 ISO 200. Now this image was shot near Santa Monica, just south of the Santa Monica Pier, where the city has installed a variety of different mechanisms that people use for practicing gymnastics and exercising. And these are a series of rings that are placed one behind the other. And the idea is to swing from one ring to the next. And it's a very interesting thing because especially some of the more athletic people do some amazing things with these rings. So here you have this young woman who's using these, and we're obviously at the beach. You see the sand, you see the people in the background, you see the condominiums, you see the palm trees all in the background. And so the heart of the image is obviously this woman moving for the scene. But one of the things about a scene like this is that you can anticipate a moment largely because it repeats itself over and over again. As she and some of the other athletes practice on these rings, you'll have a chance to observe what happens to the body as they're flowing through the scene and, when your key moment is likely to happen. Here, the overall scene is kind of interesting. They're using a slow shutter speed in order to affect the blur, but it introduces something that most people try to avoid, which is camera shake. So you're dealing with a slow shutter speed, which is going to result in shake, but because the camera is being basically panned in order to keep the subject sharp, everything else in the scene, except for the young lady, looks relatively sharp. But the thing is, when you're trying to anticipate a moment, you always want to think about where you want the moment to be. And here, what's really important is that her body is largely defined by the expanse of blue sky behind her. You see a lot of clutter in the foreground, and you see the building in the background, and you can see that her left foot is fairly cleanly defined when it's juxtaposed against those elements in the background. But when you look at both hands, the extended leg, the body, the hair, having that located against the blue sky really allows it to stand out in sharp relief. And because these series of rings happen for maybe 8, maybe even 10 of these rings, camera position is really important. So you have to anticipate, well, where do you want your moment to be? Where do you want your subject to be? Which informs where you're going to place yourself in order to make the shot. And once you have an idea of that, you have to wait for the moment. And the moment here is the moment that she is um, I think swinging forward, if I'm guessing correctly. So she's moving into the area on the left hand side of the frame. I assume that largely because of the position of her hair. Had she been moving backwards, I think that the hair would have been spinning or being sent forward. But if she was moving back, swinging on the rings back and forth, and she's finally going in to make that final swing to catch the next one, you could anticipate where her body would be relative to the sky. And so when that moment comes, you're ready for it because you have to know exactly when you want to make the shot. I'm not in favor of just using a camera in burst mode and just hoping. I usually find that the moment that I really want is in between those frames. So here, if you know what's going to happen by observing her and other people, you know when you want to make the shot, but you'll also get a read for in terms of the gesture, the line, and the shape that that person is going to make within the context here. And I couldn't ask for anything better because the way the limbs are so nicely defined, especially that right hand and that right leg, is absolutely crucial for the success of this image. All right, here we have a shot by Irina Escoffery. This was made with a Sony 7R Mark II, 1/6 of a second, f4, ISO 640. So here again we have an image that is shot at a very slow shutter speed, and here there's a lot of blur and camera motion as a result, but I actually don't mind it because the other elements in this frame really are kind of interesting. You have the fellow about to go up in the escalator, and he has a shopping bag. There's a woman to her right in a denim jacket, and it looks like the man is turning back towards the photographer and either sticking out their tongue or they have something in their mouth. It may be that they're sticking out their tongue. And that's kind of what I gravitate to because that is the one figure that is sort of clearly defined in terms of their facial expression. Then you have the person on the left who seems to have come down from the escalator, who's moving from left to right, and their face is largely blurred. You can see that they have some glasses on and what looks like it may be a goatee or it may just be shadow. And then at the top of the frame, we have two people who have nearly reached the top of the first escalator ride on the right. And then we have this mysterious figure in red whose arms are extended and they look almost angelic in the background. So here, for me, there's several moments. There's the one of the guy stepping back or looking back at the camera. We have the moment of the figure on the left-hand side moving from the left to the right hand of the frame. And then there's that picture of the woman in red with her arms extended to the left. It may appear that it's both extended, but it may be a reflection on on the side of the escalator. It's really hard to tell. But here, the moment are those three elements, but more importantly, the way they play off of each other. There's a gesture in the man turning around and sticking out his thumb. There's a gesture implied by the guy moving from the left to the right, and there's a gesture of the woman at the very top of the escalator with their arms extended. So here, what's really interesting, it's not just a singular gesture or moment. It's simultaneously three moments within the frame, and that's really difficult. You'll see a lot of photographs in the Flickr feed where there's really nothing happening. The light may be good, the setting may be good, but it's missing that extra something, that gesture, that that almost indefinable thing that takes a picture from being a snapshot to being a really exceptional photograph. And what I like about this shot, though I know people would complain that the image is not sharp, I think that the moment of those three people navigating through the scene and navigating through the frame make for an interesting shot. We see countless pictures of people going up and down escalators, and those images largely are uninteresting. They may be interesting graphically, but there's nothing happening in that moment that the shutter release is pressed. You can't say that about this picture here, and I'll debate anybody who thinks this image has less impact just because it's not tack sharp. Okay, here we have a shot by David Hollands. This was shot with Olympus EM10 at 1/500th of a second, f7.1, ISO 400. Now, here we have these guys here who are moving a block of ice. And this is, again, a moment that you kind of can anticipate because if these guys are moving blocks of ice, this is an action that will repeat itself. Unlike the image that we just talked about in the subway, and that's a scene that is not going to happen again. At least not immediately. There's a chance that you'll have three interesting figures in the frame, but you'd have to wait a while for all of that to happen. Here, and like the first shot, you can kind of read the scene and kind of know, okay, when is the moment that I'm going to want to capture? You have the setting here. You have good light, you got good line and shape throughout, you got good color, you got some line and shape. Basically, you have line and shape and light and shadow. and the color, and all you're waiting for is the gesture. You're just waiting for that moment where there's something interesting happen. And for me, that moment is when the guy on the left-hand side raises his hand up to push on the block of ice, and then we have the other hand using some sort of grabber in order to get the block of ice and put it on the platform. Or they may be doing the reverse. I'm just assuming that they're going from left to right in terms of putting on the ice, but that really doesn't matter. But it's that moment where both hands are active in dealing with the block of ice that make it really, really interesting. If you had just had the one hand, yeah, it would probably have been a good frame. But there's a visual tension that arises as a result of having both hands in the frame. And that's the moment that you're looking for. And one of the things that I do, and I really impress on you to do, is don't be in such a rush just to make the snapshot because you're afraid of missing something. You really have the choice to slow down and make sure that you're capturing something. Not just something physical, but a genuine moment. Because when that happens, the image becomes that much more interesting. This shot has all the graphic elements you typically want in a photograph. But the moment of tension that's created by the two hands dealing with a block of ice is something that really makes it a wonderful shot. And I like the fact that I'm not seeing their faces because it's all about the line and the shapes and the gesture and the moment. That's what makes the shot here by David so good. All right, I hope you found that helpful. My apologies for not being dutiful and on schedule with releasing videos with all the stuff on my plate, including producing the normal podcast. It's really hard to find the time to record and edit these videos in the way that I would like. So for right now, I think I may be doing it every 2 weeks. So forgive me for that. But the Candid Frame, as I mentioned, is my podcast in which I feature conversations with the photographers whose work I really like and enjoy. My recent conversation was with Elliot Kaufman, who is a architecture photographer, but he started his career doing a personal documentary project on American diners, and it was actually released as a book and an exhibit in the late 70s. And the re-release of the book allowed him and us to sort of revisit images of a really classic time in American food culture. So check it out by going to thecandidframe.com. You can stream it on the YouTube channel after it's released, but if you have an iPad or an iPhone or even your computer, you can stream it from there. And if you like what you're seeing in these videos, please subscribe, hit that little bell icon in order to get notified. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for joining me.